in his place in a courtroom. That was just unheard of. So these three are accused of crimes against humanity against the supporters of the opposing political party, the PNU. Specifically, they're charged with murder, deportation or forcible transfer, and persecution. So that's one half of the case. Other case, the other political party. Here we have similar crimes charged in terms of persecution, deportation, and persecution, but also rape and other inhumane acts. These three defendants, Mr. Mutara was, at the time of the violence, the head of the civil service and the secretary to President Kibaki's cabinet. Mr. Kenyatta is the son of the founding president of Kenya. He is the richest man in Kenya. Those two are not coincidental, I guess. And he was deputy prime minister at the time of the charges. He is still a prominent politician, and he is also running for president. Finally, Mr. Ali was the head of the police at the time of the post-election violence. So both of these groups are accused of being led by these three defendants to launch the post-election violence. As I said, this was all in service of this confirmation of charges hearing. So I was at a pretrial chamber. We were not deciding guilt or innocence. We were just determining whether there was enough evidence for these people to go to trial before the ICC. And there was a lot of fear that whatever decision the court came up with, it might trigger more violence related to these two political parties. Normally, the decisions would have been staggered because the hearings were staggered. So we would have had case one come out on one date, case two come out several weeks later. And the court decided that that would be a bad idea. Right? We did not want charges that might be confirmed against one side before there was a decision on the other side. The rules were interpreted in such a way that the decisions could come out on the same day. Presiding Judge Trendafilova also decided that there should be an oral summary of the decisions so that all of the people in Kenya who were very interested in this, and of course people worldwide, could hear what the decision was. Trust me, you do not want to sit down and read these decisions. I had the pleasure of trying to edit them all. It was a great experience, but they're about 140 pages of very highly technical statutory interpretation. So the judge decided she would do a summary. And there was so much interest in it that the website actually crashed. There was just too much demand for the court to handle. So what was actually decided in the case one, we had charges confirmed for the murder, deportation, or forcible transfer and persecution against Mr. Ruto, a politician, Mr. Sang, the media figure. The theory of this case is that Ruto, along with others, formed this network, and this mysterious network was behind all of this violence, and Mr. Sang, by the things he said, the announcements he made on the radio, contributed to this network being able to carry out the crimes. The court, however, decided that there was not enough evidence against Mr. Kosgei, so his case is over. So 2 out of the 3 are going forward in case 1. And in case 2, the same result ended up happening. The most high profile, Mr. Kenyatta and Mr. Mutara, they are both going to trial. Same idea that they committed, along with this other group, murder, deportation and forcible transfer, and persecution. There are also a couple of other crimes. So they're actually facing more charges on this side because it is alleged that their supporters also carried out multiple acts of rape. It was also alleged that they forcibly circumcised men from the Luo tribe, which the court decided was not actually sexual violence because forced circumcision is not sexual. Highly controversial in the literature on that one. There are also other inhumane acts, sexual mutilation, for example, that caused physical injury or mental suffering. One of the examples that the prosecutor brought forward was testimony of a little boy who watched his father being mutilated and then murdered in front of him. And the court said, yes, most definitely that's enough evidence of another inhumane act. An interesting aspect of the ICC is that you actually have more people in the courtroom than just the bench, the prosecutor, and the defense. Right? You also have representatives of the victims. Right? So the victims actually play a much larger role at the ICC than at any of the other international tribunals. So the victims' representatives looked at the facts and said, look at how much property was destroyed. As I mentioned, people were driven by their homes by having their homes destroyed, literally burnt down around them. So the victims' representatives were trying to convince the court that that should constitute another inhumane act. The prosecutor, however, did not put in enough evidence that showed that the destruction of property actually led to the requisite mental suffering. There was evidence that there was physical destruction of property, but there was no connection between that and the mental suffering. The court can't just presume that, even if it seems quite logical. So those two defendants are going to go forward to trial, but the police chief there is not. Mr. Ali was accused of working with the rest of this group. He was accused of telling his police to help this group commit its acts. But in fact, the evidence did not support that. Instead, there was evidence that some individual police officers took sides, but nothing that connected it to Mr. Ali. And in fact, there was a lot of evidence that showed that lots of those hundreds of thousands of people who fled their homes fled to police stations where they were given shelter. So Mr. Ali will not be prosecuted before the court. These people are being prosecuted. Right? Hundreds of thousands of people have been internally displaced. Over 1,000 people have been killed. Like, clearly these 4 people are not the only ones responsible. Right? So the idea is that the International Criminal Court will deal with the worst of the worst, right? Those most responsible, the leaders. But national prosecutions are supposed to deal with the others. So let's talk briefly about how Kenya is doing that. Right? They were supposed to respond to the post-election violence by investigating. We talked about how they did not do that in terms of the top leaders. But they actually have not done that overall. Not only have they not gone after the ringleaders, they really haven't gone after the direct perpetrators either. There have been a very few prosecutions at all, and many of them have not had any connection to the post-election violence. You know, Kenya has listed them, but if you look at them, they'll say something like, you know, stealing a cow. Okay, I'm sure that's a crime, but what does it have to do with the post-election violence, right? So a lot of the actual crimes that we're talking about, right, have not actually been prosecuted. There are alternatives to prosecution, right? There could be some other way of dealing with things, and the Kenyans set up the Truth, Justice, and Reconciliation Commission that would at least investigate things and publicize offenders and maybe give some sort of measure of restorative justice. Unfortunately, the commission has gotten a tiny fraction of its budget. But I was trying to research the other day whether it's ever actually issued its final report. And its website is so out of date, I don't know whether it's actually issued it and it just didn't get any press because it was that unimpressive, or if it's still delaying it because it hasn't had the resources to do it. Another development is that Kenya did pass a new constitution in 2010, and that does include a lot of judicial reforms. So it seems like the court system is improving. But you can't really have a strong criminal justice system unless you have a strong, competent, and independent prosecutorial system as well. And they basically have only a handful of professional prosecutors, not nearly enough to deal with the post-election violence. So the last report that I've been able to find that gives a comprehensive review of the Kenyan response was from the end of last year. And at that time, no one from the police, no one from any political party had actually been convicted of any crimes in connection with the post-election violence. So I'm going to stop there, although I am also happy to talk about the broader question of peace versus justice outside of Kenya, if you would like to. I'll just turn this on so I can see you all. Alright. So I'm happy to entertain any questions or comments you all might have. Yes?
How is the international criminal justice
funded? That's actually a huge issue at the International Criminal Court.
Yeah.
So the ICC is funded by the states that are parties to it. So each state is supposed to contribute a certain amount of money. And while I was there, the new budget was under consideration. And I was there in this visiting professional program, which I like to say is basically a glorified intern. Like, you're too old to be an intern, but we'll let you come and work with us anyway. And even the internship program was on the chopping block because with all of the economic pressures that states are facing, they're basically saying, we're going to cut your budget at the same time you're dealing with more cases. So for instance, the Libya case was added recently by the Security Council, but when the Security Council refers a case, it doesn't have to give the court any money. It just says, gives them more work. So the budget is a real problem because it's all just voluntary contributions. Yes?
Does the ICC have the power to arrest suspects who don't turn themselves in?
Excellent question. No.
No.
Basically, the ICC has no police force. It has no enforcement mechanism of its own. Right? So the only way that someone is actually going to end up at the court is if some other state cooperates with the court. So far we have, for instance, the Kenya suspects who've all just voluntarily showed up. Right? In other cases, we've had all of the suspects being turned over by a state. For example, by the Democratic Republic of Congo has turned over its own citizens with the assistance of France. Mm-hmm. Other times, you just have to wait to see if anyone will actually be captured or turned over. So 2 examples with that. One is Uganda. Right? Joseph Kony, you've probably heard of the whole Kony 2012 video, right? Really did an excellent job of raising awareness, but still nobody has caught him. Right? So the only way he's going to end up at the ICC is if some state, military, Uganda in particular, or one of the neighboring states actually captures him and turns him over to the ICC. Other defendant, like the president of Sudan, right, everybody knows where he is. So it's not a matter of finding him in the bush of the lake region in Africa. The problem is that the Sudan isn't a state party, and the president is never going to turn himself over. Right? So theoretically, there is a responsibility of other states' parties. So if you've joined the ICC and someone who's wanted by the court comes on your territory, you're supposed to turn them over to the court. And so President al-Bashir, for instance, went to Malawi, went to Chad, went to all sorts of other countries in Africa, but those states all said, he's the president of a country. We're not going to arrest him and turn him over to the court. And the African Union came out very strongly for that principle, saying that sovereign immunity rules. The statute of the court actually says there's no such thing as sovereign immunity when it comes to the actual prosecution, but it's a lot fuzzier of whether there's sovereign immunity when it comes to actually capturing someone and turning them over to the court. So there's a couple of controversial decisions that came out while I was there that basically determined that states like Chad and Malawi were violating its duties under the statute by not arresting President al-Bashir. Basically what happens? Well, the court said that. And it actually refers them back to the Security Council or refers to the Assembly of State Parties, which might somehow censure them or do some other sort of punishment. But the likelihood of the Security Council actually doing anything is slim to none, and the Assembly of States Parties doesn't really have much in the way of authority either. So that's a huge, huge sticking point with international criminal courts, and magnified in the realm of international human rights, is that there is no international police force. There is no real enforcement mechanism.
Anything else?
In your opinion, do you believe the International Criminal Court can serve justice to Kenya?
Yes, I think it's only going to be one piece. I think justice is much broader than prosecuting just a few people.